people that say that HIV is not the cause of AIDS are practicing supreme denial. It is amazing how human beings can look at black and call it white, or look at white and call it black. They can look at all this evidence, but if they don't choose to believe it, they don't choose to believe it.
I've been covering AIDS for something like 20 years, and for perhaps half of that time, I reported it from the conventional orthodox perspective that this was a deadly new virus that was causing this condition and spreading secretly among us, putting at risk everybody who was sexually active. In the last few years, I've come across some different points of view which, to begin with, I found very hard to believe or accept, but I found some space in my very busy work schedule at the London Sunday Times in the early 90s, where I was working as medical and science correspondent, to study the references and the viewpoints being put forward by some doctors and scientists, mainly in the States, who had this questioning viewpoint about HIV's role in AIDS. And gradually, to my amazement, I found that the evidence seemed to suggest that they were much closer to the truth than what I'd been reporting previously.
I was an undergraduate biology student at Florida A&M University when I first heard that some people were saying that HIV doesn't cause AIDS. This sounded really crazy to me, but I looked into it, and I found out that the leading critic of the HIV causes AIDS model was a University of California at Berkeley biology professor, Peter Duesberg, who was a pioneer in the study of retroviruses, and HIV is a retrovirus. Duesberg was the first scientist to isolate the genetic structure of a retrovirus, and this was a discovery that several of my textbooks had described. I read some of his papers. They were very fascinating, they were very clear, and they made sense to me.
The basic assumption that AIDS was infectious has never been, in fact, tested, never been discussed, never been contested, or never been proved. That is an assumption that is very popular among doctors and scientists who study microbes and viruses, which are the bulk of doctors these days, or scientists in microbiology. But the majority of diseases affecting us in the Western world, that is over 99% of them, are not caused by viruses and microbes. But all doctors are all too happy to blame any disease or any new variant of a disease on a microbe, because then they know what to do, what to look for, and how to possibly cope with it by making vaccines and antimicrobial and antibiotic drugs. We are now indicting the most harmless and most difficult to detect viruses with technology that is designed to find a needle in a haystack and blame them for fatal diseases under conditions where they are virtually undetectable in a patient, like HIV and AIDS. And that's the trouble with the hypothesis. We are blaming a virus that is practically not there, only antibodies against it are there, that is biochemically not active, that is not infecting more than 1 in 1,000 of T cells in an AIDS patient for fatal immune deficiency. If that were a cause of death, none of us would be speaking here today. We would all be in cemeteries or in intensive care units.
Dr. Kary Mullis, who invented the polymerase chain reaction, gives this in '83, I believe, and he got the Nobel Prize in 1993, gives this little story that he was hired to do PCR for an HIV project for a private company, and he wrote as the first sentence of his paper, HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. And he said he turned to a virologist and said, what's the reference for that? And the virologist said, you don't need it. Well, Mullis is smart enough to know, of course, something new as this, you'd always have a series of original papers that established unequivocally that this was the cause of AIDS.
Then, and only then, I started looking into it. I looked up a bunch of papers in science that Bob Gallo, I knew about him and had written. I figured, well, Gallo must have been the one to figure it out, because he's the name I've heard associated with it. And I looked at his papers, and I didn't find anything in there that actually showed me that there was a fact now in science called HIV is the cause of AIDS, or even the probable cause of AIDS, which is all I would have expected, the probable cause of AIDS. Highly probable, because they were attacking the whole problem by then as though it were certainly the cause. So I'd expect it to be highly probable, but I couldn't find anything that said it was remotely probable even. It was possible, but it wasn't probable. And so therefore, it wasn't even close to what you'd call a fact.
Well, I call these the AIDS axioms. AIDS is contagious, AIDS is sexually transmitted, AIDS is caused by HIV, and that the anti-HIV drugs promote health and well-being. The reason I call these axioms is because they're assumed to be true. These four statements are assumed to be true. You cannot find the evidence in the scientific literature that shows that these AIDS axioms are indeed true.
Many human beings are not rational. They don't operate on logic, they operate on emotions. And that's exactly what those people are doing. They don't want to believe it, so it's not the case. But unfortunately, they are completely 100% wrong. There is no doubt that HIV causes AIDS. The scientific evidence is absolutely overwhelming. But if you choose to ignore it, of course, you can ignore it. Such is the power of the human mind.
There are no really good experiments that would lead anybody who was at least maintaining a healthy skepticism to believe that HIV was responsible for this series of, not series, but kind of a loose confederation of diseases that people are now willing to call AIDS, right? It's a confederation of maybe 30 different diseases, all of which have existed in one form or other prior to the condition that we call AIDS ever being pointed out, and all of which have had some other explanation at one time or other. You know, to say that all 30 of those are somehow caused, in at least some cases, called AIDS cases, by a virus called HIV, I think I haven't seen any evidence for that. I haven't even seen anybody trying to bring evidence forth for that.
And he said he's been looking for that since, I guess, the late 80s, and he hasn't ever been able to find anyone that can give him a paper that showed, number one, isolation of HIV, rigorous formal isolation of HIV, and secondly, using Koch's postulates, demonstrating that HIV is a causal microorganism. Where is the original paper that isolated HIV so that nothing else was present, and they actually could go and find what the proteins were and the nucleic acids were? I think you won't find that paper because it hasn't been published yet.
I mean, I understand there are a lot of people, if you ask them about HIV causing AIDS as being a fact, they'll say, of course, it's indisputable. And the very fact that they will say it's indisputable might lead you to question their ability to understand the scientific method. People that think any scientific fact is indisputable don't understand about scientific facts.
Springfielders are advised to stay tuned for more information if they experience any of the following symptoms: mild thirst, occasional hunger, tiredness at night.